right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the FearCast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD and anxiety spectrum disorders, and getting your life back. I'm your host, Kevin Foss, and I'm a licensed therapist specializing in OCD and anxiety disorders. Thank you all so much for joining me today for this episode. And thank you for joining me for any episode that you've checked out. And if you're joining me on not Facebook, if you're joining me on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. If you're joining me just on podcast, I'm more than happy to be along with you for your drive or for your run, or when I listen to podcasts, it's trying to put my kids to sleep, or I'm gardening or doing something like that. So wherever and however you're listening to this, thank you all so much for joining me. So this is a question and answer based podcast. If you have a question about OCD and anxiety disorders, go over to fearcastpodcast.com, send me a message over there with your question. I will read it, consider it, and likely put it up. If you want to cut the line, you can go over to Instagram. I am FearCast Podcast over at Instagram. You can send me a message over there. You can specifically send me an audio message over there. You can record your voice in a DM, and I will get that, consider it, and it will cut to the top of the line. Now, thank you all again for sending me in those questions. We haven't gotten an audio question in a long time. So if you have a question and you really want your question answered, or you just want to hear your voice on a podcast, send me a message over at the FearCast, or send me a message over at Instagram. I'd love to put that up there. But I mean, we've got plenty of questions in the hopper, as we are going to go with today. So let's see. I said earlier that I was going to try to make it to the ADAA conference in Las Vegas, and I realized it's starting today. I'm recording on Thursday, April 3rd. This will come out on the following Monday, but I am not there. Other things came up, and alas, I'm not going to be able to make it. But I think I'm going to Chicago for the IOCDF conference. So hopefully you guys can make it. If you are there, give me a high five, a fist bump, or just a mean glare. Like, just stare at me from across the room and make me feel like judged or something like that. That's also fun. So either way, thank you all again for joining me. Oh man, let's see here. So let's see. Well, why don't we just jump into things? Not a whole lot has been happening in my life, in case you're wondering. I know I posted a picture on Instagram of this band I'm playing in with a couple of my friends. I'm playing upright bass in it, so doing plucking and bowing in that, and it's been a huge challenge for me. And it's a silly thing to say, but as it turns out, when you practice, you get better. About this time last year, I started working on it, and my bowing sucked. And no, I shouldn't say that. It was an abysmal sound that would make you want to just, I don't know, cut off your ears. Is that too much? That's probably too much. But you practice, you get better. Now it sounds less terrible, not expert level, but you know what? Better for me. And you know what? I think it's an important lesson to remember for myself, for everybody else. If you keep at it, if you keep doing something, you're going to improve. There'll be days that are setbacks, man. Remember, a couple of weeks ago, I sat down and I was practicing, and nothing was sounding right. I put it away and I went, I'm going to practice another day. I came back, it sounded better. So I don't know, there's a lot to be learned from that. But anyways, the performance went well. We're setting up another one for a couple of weeks from now. I don't know if or when we're going to do, an actual performance at an actual place, but we'll see. So if it ever happens, I'll let you people know, or don't come and save yourself time and your ears. So don't cut off your ears, everybody. Anyways, let's jump into the questions here. So I'm going to go through two questions. The first question, very short. The second question, a little longer, but we'll make it through. So the first question comes from Bambi Nymph. Great name. I don't know if it's your real name. Great name. Point is, here's your question. How do we do ERP for a false memory when accepting that thought is very ego dystonic? And what are some characteristics of false memories. All right, so first off, Bambi, I'm going to say I'm not going to be able to give you a clear idea so you can differentiate exactly which one of your memories are false memories and which one of your memories are factual memories. All right, that's part of the question. That's part of the fear that comes to false memory obsession. So, false memory obsessions. I know we've talked about this before. It is an obsession about whether or not something that you are feeling like you remember, a story that's playing out in your mind, did it actually happen or is it made up, right? False memories can be created. There's a ton of research done on this. You can look up how false memories are made. Elizabeth Loftus is the name you're going to want to associate that. But look it up. It's super fascinating. But so how do you differentiate between the two? Well, I think there's an element to these false memories, and I think you're kind of identifying it. They're ego dystonic, so they're really outside of what you would typically do. Sometimes with false memories, people will remember things. I'm putting that in quotes. Y'all can't see that. But they remember it in that it's a story that's playing out in their mind. But oftentimes they're getting anxiety with it because usually the story they're remembering is like the complete opposite of what they would do, or they were remembering something that they did something violent, or they did something aggressive, or they did something just mean-spirited, or they did something, fill in the blank that they wouldn't typically do. Now, those memories can be reinforced and feel more like memories the more you play them out. This is where rumination can kind of become problematic because the more you play a ruminative story, the more it starts to become solidified and the more it can feel like an actual memory. They are not. So how do we do ERP to false memories? Well, one, we can do the RP part. The RP, the response prevention, the ritual prevention, is resisting trying to answer, resisting trying to get to the bottom of it. So in that, you can also, when you notice that thought come up and that urge to try to get into it, that's where you can point out, you know what, maybe that happened, maybe it didn't, and I'm not going to know. You can. This is kind of that. Oh boy, why does my brain do this to me? I can't remember. The non-engagement responses. Excuse me, where you acknowledge the thought, you acknowledge the urge, you acknowledge the desire to jump into a thought, and then you redirect elsewhere. Right? You go like, man, I really want to answer that. I really want to get to the bottom of that, but I'm not gonna. And we go do something else. We do something else with our time and our energy. Right. You can lean into it a little bit further by going, yeah, maybe it did happen. Maybe it didn't happen. I don't know. But I'm going to let the universe tell me. Right. So it depends on, the nature of the false memory and the fear you have about that. But, ultimately with these false memories, the least time you can spend in it, the better. So Bambi Nymph, I'm going to leave it at that for now because the second question also has to do a little bit with false memories. So this is going to take a little bit to read, but we'll get through it together. This comes from Ellie. So Ellie says, hello, I'm a new listener, having newly discovered the podcast within the last few months, but then again, I was only diagnosed with OCD the last few months. So I haven't been as conscious as of the condition and working to recover. My therapist has explained to me that I have existential OCD. At first, I thought it was simply the long aftermath of a bad mushroom trip last year, or that it was a sign of something deeper or scarier like schizophrenia or brain tumor. But between therapy, starting on Wellbutrin, and listening to podcasts, particularly yours, which I have now listened to many episodes for advice, I've learned better how to cope with a lot of my scarier thoughts. Awesome, Ellie. All right. She goes on to say, however, there's one particular facet that I just cannot seem to find the correct approach for. Essentially, I would describe it as a feeling quote, time sick. End quote, I should say. So I have difficulty with the concept of passing of time, how humans perceive time, etc. I especially have trouble with the concept of the, quote, eternal now, which, of course, is inescapable. When it's particularly bad, I have anxiety over the distance of time between right now, as I'm writing this, and when I started writing the beginning of this message. I tried to, quote, agree with my disconfirming thoughts, which helped to alleviate a lot of my anxieties when I was worried about living in a simulation. I will agree with my thoughts or follow them. I will agree with the thoughts or follow them to their logical conclusion or emphasize their uncertainty. Quote, maybe this is a memory of a memory, or maybe right now this whole day or my whole life will just whip past me before I even realize it. Or maybe everything prior to now is just a false memory, and what I just did, so for example, going to the bathroom, making my bed, running to the gym, etc., didn't really happen. Or maybe I can't really experience anything because I didn't process it until after it happened. But it doesn't work as well as it did with other existential thoughts, because of course, a few moments later, time passed. That feeling is there again, and since it's always now, I'm pretty much always thinking about this. It's not so much that time. It's not so much the time on the clock that bugs me. I'm aware of this is a social construct, but changes in activity or setting, like going from one room in my apartment to another, or passing through a lot of different areas on a drive, or leaving work from my lunch break. Sometimes even just changing what I'm physically looking at triggers the feeling. So, for example, can I truly remember what I was just looking at? What's the difference between experience and memory? All right, she goes on to say, and we're getting to the end, I promise. I feel like this is a particularly, quote, crazy intrusive thought, even if it even is an intrusive thought. It is. And I really struggle with and am frustrated by both how hard it is to describe to other people, and subsequently how hard it is for professionals and myself to address. I feel like I can't do exposure therapy because literally the act of living is constantly exposing me to it. I don't feel like I'm altogether a dysfunctional person, but the ever presence of these thoughts in my head make me feel like I'm losing it. I don't know how I'm supposed to accept and allow these thoughts when, as time passes, they will pop up again and again. If you have any advice whatsoever, please reach out. So I don't necessarily need a question answered on the podcast itself, but of course it'd be a nice perk. And that's what's happening today, Ellie. All right. So thank you all, everybody, for getting through that long one. I edited that down, if you can believe that. But I wanted to leave a lot of those details in because I think a lot of folks will resonate with the amount of detail that's in it. And I appreciate that because there's some of those obsessions that feel like, gosh, how am I even supposed to explain this to somebody? What am I supposed to do with this? How do I communicate what's the problem? And Ellie, you were saying that's part of it that makes you feel exceptionally crazy. And people who are listening to this get it. Right? The fun part about our brain is that we can be triggered or anxious about anything our imagination can create. Yeah, our brain is going to think about that and be concerned about it or question it or worry about it. Even if it's the most existential, out there, intangible thing, our brain can worry about it. And that's one of the wonderful parts about our brain is that we can consider that. I'm willing to bet the birds that are outside that are eating the birdseed or, destroying my lawn, they're not worried about this. Yeah, they're not worried about this, but you and I can be. So thanks, brain. Thanks for that super fun aspect. All right. So what can you do about this? Well, so a couple of things were coming to mind. I mean, the first thing about this, the first thing that I want to nail down with anybody that I'm working with is what is so scary about this? What is so bad about this? So, a couple of things came to mind. Is it, that you're not remembering what you did? Right? Just the fact that you didn't remember it? Is it that you don't remember what you did so that you may have done something, right? Some people will worry about this because they worry that the reality is they don't remember everything, and that they're not getting the full experience out of life, right? So for some people, it might be if they're not remembering everything, it means that, they're living a lackluster life or they're missing out or it's just kind of, awful for whatever reason. whatever it might be, that's important. You kind of alluded to that. It's like, what if life is passing you by without you knowing? But then you also go on to talk about it's almost like sometimes just change of physical location. Oh man, I'm totally losing it. Anyways, essentially, it's like you're forgetting things that you're doing throughout the day, and something about that is really terrifying. Okay, so it feels as if, just from what you're describing, as if it's a, quote, need to know OCDs. There's a subtype that we call a need to know, and it's this just incredible urge that for whatever reason, it's that you need to have the answer. You need to get to the bottom of it. You need to fully understand something. Right? And oftentimes the information that you're seeking is innocuous. It's useless. It's silly information. We would say it's silly information. But for whatever reason, anxiety has grabbed onto it and said, this is the most important thing. You have to absolutely get to the answer, get to the bottom of this, or else it makes it a life or death sort of proposition. And I think you've recognized it's not, yet it feels like it is. So as you were kind of describing it, and as I was reading through it, a couple of things came to mind that I think you're butting up against. I think certainly, there might be need to know OCD at play here, right? So it's important to, in this, recognize, and this is maybe part of the way you can challenge this if you're not working with a therapist. There are plenty of books out there on CBT and ERP. The Mindfulness Workbook for OCD might be a really good one for you in this. It's by Hirschfield and Corboy, so go check it out. There's a whole section that talks about cognitive distortions and talks about alternative thought records and challenging your thoughts. It may be helpful for you to go through that to consider the importance of this thought, why it bothers you, and to see if you can think about this from a slightly different angle. So, why is it necessary for you to answer it, or if you can recognize maybe it's not as important, right? The ICBT folks might also be helpful. You can particularly look at letting OCD speak. So it's the module 2. We've talked about module 2 a lot on the episode or on the podcast before. But if you look at module 2 from ICBT, it talks about the OCD logic, right? What is the story it's telling? Why? And it's kind of tied into module 1, obviously, but maybe it's not obvious. But it talks about what is the feared story for you in that, and what is the reasoning, the logic that OCD is producing to make your compulsion, your rumination, your checking, all the compulsions that you're doing necessary. And if you can kind of see how that's playing out, perhaps that can help you to view it from a different angle and perhaps give you the courage to resist those compulsions. Anyways, so I think you're butting up against that, but I think you're also butting up against, and this might be contributing to, this is contributing to the fear, I would say, is the reality that we don't remember everything. We don't. As humans, we don't. There is this, you might have heard of muscle memory. Sometimes it's called, and similarly, it's procedural memory. All right. So how this tends to work for us is that you can think about your brain is constantly working, constantly trying to figure out and move yourself through the world. All right. You said, moving from one room in your apartment to another, going from thing to thing, right? Your brain is trying to constantly get you there in the most effective way. Okay. So as it's doing that, it's working a lot. But our brain is super lazy. It works really hard to then be really lazy. All right, here's how it works. When you're learning a new task or when you're in a new environment, your brain is on high alert. It's trying to figure out where things are, how things work, what are the pitfalls, what are the advantages, what's the best way through this, how to interact with that environment. Okay. And it feels very slow. And it is very slow because you're having to piece it all together. You do that a bunch of times, and eventually your brain just kind of puts all those steps into chunks. Okay. And those are the procedures. So it's kind of, I kind of viewing it as like playing the tape, right? So it puts it together and then it takes that chunk and it runs that program. All right. Think about if you're in college or if you're in high school or whatever it is, your first day at work, your first day at college, what was it like? You might remember a lot of that, right? Go into class, figuring out where things were. The first day at work, right? You had to go to HR and talk to them, and you sat down and you went through the HR packet and you had these conversations. You went here and you met these people, and there's like a lot going on, and your brain was kind of putting all that together. Another one you can think about is like, and this is similar to what you were talking about, is like your drive from house to work and back. The first time you do it, your brain is on high alert trying to figure out all the twists and turns and lights and strategy to get there. And eventually, you do that enough, your brain goes, stand back, Ellie, I got this, right? So it plays the tape. It plays the going to work program. So it puts that into play and it runs it because you've spent all that time programming your brain to do it. So your attention can kind of sit back, and it doesn't have to be as stressed on alert. Now, your brain then filters out the things that are unnecessary or useless or unimportant. All right, because it doesn't want to waste energy on things that are unimportant. Now, the big things, it is going to solidify into long-term memory. But as you're going throughout your day, there's a lot of stuff that you encounter that fit within your short-term memory. And then when you go to sleep, your brain consolidates a lot of that into long-term memory, and that's where dreams come from and all that. If you've noticed, when you dream, you sometimes dream about stuff that you thought about or experienced or dealt with or stressed about during the day before. That's kind of what it's doing. So it's reactivating that. Anyways, there's a lot of stuff, and I'm sure some brain researchers, if you are listening to this, are going, Kevin, you got it wrong, or you're saying, Kevin, you nailed it and you're brilliant. Possible. All right, here's what's going on. So your brain is filtering those things out, so it just simply doesn't remember. You might have heard people talk about, I've certainly experienced this, where you go like, you left the house and you suddenly showed up at work. You're like, how did I even do that? It's because your brain played the tape. So you can just get to work, right? I also love this example. Like if you've ever, been in your car, you know where all the things are. And then you get in a new car, or you rent a car, you borrow a friend's car, or whatever the case may be, and you get in and you're like, where is everything? And now you have to spend the energy to try to figure out where all the doodads are. And do you press a button? Do you do a key? Where's the radio at? How do you do the air conditioning? Do you got to get the seat going on? And you do all the things, and you have to figure all that out. After like a couple of days, you get in and you just do it, because you programmed your brain. All right, all this is that procedural memory, okay? So your brain is naturally going to forget things. So what we ultimately need to do with this is to accept the reality that we forget stuff. I know that sounds so silly, but I think that's also where your brain is attaching to this and saying it's incredibly important to you to remember everything. And that's where that consequence is. Like, what is that story? What is that story? Play it out. Think about what is so disastrous about forgetting, because you're going to. I'm going to. And now, so as we practice accepting this, it might feel like, we fight against this reality. So I'd challenge you to consider, how is it that you are fighting against this reality? Are you spending time really trying to get to the bottom of it? Are you wasting your day like really trying to go back in your memory to step by step to how you got to where you're going, or how you got to where you are, right? All of that is, and it can be considered like memory hoarding, or it can be considered, it's ultimately a compulsion to try to make sure that you're collecting all of that information. Now, again, I could be totally wrong. Ellie, you're not in my office for me to ask you follow-up questions, so alas, here we are. But one of the things that exercise, that activity is evidence that you are not accepting the reality that we forget. We will. I will encourage you, if you haven't done it already, go watch Inside Out, the first one in this one. Now, I know we've talked about Inside Out a bajillion times, but I'm going to do it again. If you remember in the movie, there is like a chasm of forgotten memories, right? There's all those core memories, and they put them into long-term memory. And again, they do a great job kind of showing that Riley made all these memories throughout the day. And then they go through the process of filtering out the useless ones and then putting the desired ones into long-term memory. Now, the chasm of forgotten memories is an incredibly sad thing because Joy goes down there along with Bing Bong and looks at these. I've seen this a lot in case you're curious. That looks at these memories and they are beautiful memories and wonderful and things that you desire. And I'm telling you, I don't know if I could rewatch it without getting a little teared up because I am forgetting things that I am so certain I would not forget. And I've forgotten them. And they're really important things that I want to remember, stuff that my kids said or did. And I'm going to forget those. And they show that Riley forgets those too in her short, 10 years of life, 12 years of life, who knows? I don't even know how old she is. Point is we're going to. Now, I would challenge you to consider how you're fighting against that, what feels like you're losing, and then to sit with the feeling of that. And there's a little bit of mourning the reality that you're going to forget some of those things. And hopefully that can also be an encouragement to redirect back to the present and appreciating and accepting and focusing on and acknowledging all that's happening right now, not trying to hoard those memories for another time, because in the process of doing that, you're missing out on the here and the now. So here's what I want you to do. When you're in that space, ground yourself in what's happening right now. Really focus on what do you see, what do you experience, what are you feeling now? And do the best that you can to be present. And say, I might remember this, I might forget this, but I'm going to try to engage with my life now as best I possibly can. Now, there are further exercises that you can do. I'd encourage you to look up acceptance. You can practice meditation, practice focusing or anchoring yourself in something. We've talked about anchoring yourself in the breath, as boring as that possibly is, which it is. But the idea is that you are redirecting back to it. Your breath is always happening now. So focus on that. And you can do that as well to conversations. You can do that to the movie you're watching. You can do that to the birds that you're listening to in the park or the birds that are slowly destroying your lawn. And let yourself enjoy it and acknowledge that some of that you're going to forget, right? I was talking to a pastor friend that I've heard this said about things in church, and I'm sure all pastors who are listening to this, or all speakers, or all podcasters out there, will resonate with this. I heard it said about going to church and listening to a sermon is that they're not going to remember what you said, but they'll remember how you said it. So they'll forget all the detailed words for the most part, like a lot of the detailed words and the really amazing alliterations that they put together or this, stuff like that. But they'll remember the conviction, the heart, the compassion, the encouragement that they provided, right? I'm sure listeners of this podcast, Ellie, you included, have forgotten a lot of the details of what I've said, but hopefully what you've taken is the encouragement and the hope that by resisting compulsion, by engaging in the present, you can get your life back. And that's the hope of all this. That's why sometimes we need to hear it over and over and over again. Anyways, so let's shift over to some exposures you can do. So first and foremost, maybe not first and foremost, let's start with that. Practicing sitting with the potential of forgetting. Okay, so when that thought comes up, we're not going to engage with trying to remember. We're going to engage with that feeling of loss. And we're going to acknowledge that it's sad. We're going to acknowledge where we feel it in our body. And we're going to acknowledge it as a reality that doesn't need to be fought. It's a reality. Why fight it? It's going to be a useless endeavor to try to do. You're just going to waste your time. So we're going to say, this feels uncomfortable and I am sad. And you are. And it is uncomfortable. But it is. And the more that we can live with that, the more that we can make space for that reality, that also then frees you up to be present without trying to hold on to the past. Your brain will hold on to the past, as it will. But you want to live here in the present. All right. So some movies that you could potentially watch. So movies about time travel. You talked about what if I'm missing things? What if I'm just going through my life and I'm going to completely miss it all? Great. Let's talk about some movies that are related to that. Back to the Future. Go watch it. All three of them. skip that second one. Get to that third one. That one's fun. I like that one. 12 Monkeys. It's a little bit scarier. Go for it. You can watch About Time if you want a chick flick version about time travel. That's awesome. If you really just go watch About Time. It's great, but not a lot of people talk about it. If you want to be confused, go watch Primer. I've seen graphs on what is happening in that movie. I got through about 30 minutes of it and went, I'm not smart enough for this movie, and I'm okay with that. So I stopped it and I watched something else. But anyways, you go watch that. Be confused. Go be worried that you're losing your mind. Groundhog's Day. Also a super fun one. Go watch it. It's a good one about forgetting. It's one about losing opportunity, missing out on life. He goes through and he lives 100 lifetimes. I think he said 5 years of life. Anyways, living that over and over and over again. And everyone else in that movie is living life over and over and over again and losing it. Sit with that. Also, some potential movies about forgetting, right? So Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind might be worth watching, and to sit with the anxiety that comes from that. I'm wondering about movies about dementia or again, memory. So Awakenings is kind of an older movie with Robert De Niro and Robin Williams. It's a super interesting movie. The Notebook. If you're into that kind of thing, go for it. I remember watching that in college and just going, this is a movie about a bad relationship. You could watch Memento. I also bootlegged this in college, and I got a bootleg that they edited it into chronological order. So I was wondering why everyone thought the movie was so amazing. Like, yeah, it made sense to me. Anyways, so I missed out on that one, but you could experience the fullness of it. Lastly, Minority Report. So the Tom Cruise movie may be worth a look through. So I know I'm just kind of throwing some things at you real quick, but give those things a try. Practice thinking about, what are you missing out on? What is the fear related to this? But more importantly, letting go of trying to remember and trying to fix it so that you can hoard it all. Let yourself forget and acknowledge that that's part about being human, and you're human and you can forget. Like the rest of us. Even though there is sadness involved with that, there is also freedom and joy found in being present with your life. So, Ellie, thank you so much. Bambi Nymph, thank you so much. And if you would like your question answered, send me a message over at fearcastpodcast.com or over at Instagram. So until next time, everybody, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye. Thank you for listening to the FearCast. If you would like your question answered on a future episode, please click on the Submit a Question link at fearcastpodcast.com. If you would like your question answered sooner, please send me a recording of your question to questions@fearcastpodcast.com or by sending me an audio message through Instagram by DMing me at FearCastPodcast on Instagram. If you like the FearCast, please write a review on your podcast platform of choice. Please remember that the FearCast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you need a little bit of help in your recovery, please go over to fearcastpodcast.com and click on the Find Help link, and there's going to be some information for you there. So until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye.